Aleister Black, good to see you. Welcome to Pop Alternative.
Thank you very much, man. I appreciate your time and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. For me, I'm a big pro wrestling fan. I'm also a big fan of heavy metal music, and I'm a big fan of horror movies. And there's a reason why I love all three of those things, and it's, the energy, right? The excitement. I feel like I'm on a roller coaster when I partake in those activities. I
Mm.
know when you were starting in pro wrestling, you're focusing on the in-ring and the actual craft of everything, but was the energy and excitement something that kind of stood out to you early on in your early days of professional wrestling?
No, I was always especially going from Europe, like the style was very much more methodical, more technically driven. Thinking about like the British like style of wrestling and the European catch style, which was much more grappling orientated. And coming from a martial arts background myself, growing up, I watched New Japan predominantly because we didn't have WWE back in Amsterdam. So my exposure was also more towards the Japanese style of wrestling and Japanese wrestler. I will say that one of my first favorites was Hayabusa, who was obviously a very like aesthetically driven character and has a very exciting, high energy style. Um, but the correlation of like the super aesthetics and that very drivenness of almost an art like form did actually come more from music and me infusing what I perceived as like things like black metal and stuff like that and like
Yeah.
hardcore um, and the occult into my fusion of professional wrestling that kind of came more from that and it's like pre this conversation we had a short talk where you know like I said like it's kind of where these why they coincide with each
Yeah.
other so much in terms of like music and wrestling. It lives together, and for me those elements in particular came more from the music than the wrestling itself because again I wasn't used to the high octane show that was WWE at the time as
Yes.
I started, and it didn't come in until like much later. So for me, that came more from music at first before seeing it unfold in like the WCWs and the WWEs.
Can I say that you have one of my favorite wrestling entrance musics of all time? Like, am I biased because of the music we listen to?
That's completely fair. Like I think that I obviously a big part of me is the entrances and they've also they were that on the independent scene because I quickly kind of got smart to it's the first thing that the audience really sees, so you want to make an impression, you want them to feel something. And I remember very vividly that I read this interview with Danny Filth from Cradle of Filth when I was younger, and he spoke about how the reason why he does a lot of these theatrics is because he saw like in the early '80s and end of the '70s, he saw like Alice Cooper and Iron Maiden having these really big performances, and for Iron Maiden having Eddie on stage in a big puppet form, and there were theatrics involved. And it's the first thing people see, so it sets the tone. So for me, an entrance was always like a big part of who I was, um, and that that went into the indies, that went into WB, that went into like when I moved to AEW, and then like obviously back to WB. The entrances have always been a big part of my presentation, and it's for those exact reasons.
Absolutely. I feel like it's a two-headed monster, Alistair, a little bit with, the in-ring craft and then the spectacle component of professional wrestling with the, storylines and the characters and the heels and the faces. I feel like those are two different things from a mindset preparation perspective. Is it a tug of war sometimes balancing those two things? Because it's not like you just have to focus about the in-ring, right? But it's also you don't just have to focus about the mic work and the characters. It's both. What's that been like for you over your years, kind of balancing those two things?
I think the balance has been well, not maybe not the balance, but what the trick has been is that um, if I shifted within like whether it was a different company or like a different character or like persona A being more considered quote unquote a good guy or a bad guy, is that I could not make them depart from one another. I could not neglect or um, move away from the essence of what made character A likable for the fans, and at the same time they had to be removed enough for people to rebel against it if that was the prerogative. um, in recent years, I have come to the conclusion that yes, there is, a bad guy and a good guy, but there is nuances to it. Whereas there is going to be fans that will completely side with what we is perceived to be the quote unquote bad guy, and obviously the same goes for the good guys. So in terms of like good versus bad, it's kind of like, whatever dispositions you have. So what I would say isn't necessarily always in the eyes of the beholder the more wicked thing to say. So it's a very nuanced thing now where yes, there is a perceived good and bad guy, but still there is a conviction rate for people in regards to what they perceive as good or bad, depending on what their moral ground is. So it's it's a very different approach nowadays with how we cut promos or how we infuse elements in the character, because there's going to be a part of the crowd that says, oh, absolutely not. This guy is an a-hole. And then there's going to be a part of the crowd that's going to say, well, you know what? He's actually onto something. I think he's right. So it's, it's that makes it sometimes difficult and tricky, but at the same time, it's also where the element of like fun lies for me.
Yeah,
But every inception has its own nature and has its own narrative that, for the most part, at least how I see it, does not deviate too much from the core essence of the character.
absolutely. Um, Feuds are really exciting in regards to we always want to know what's going to happen week to week, how the feud's going to kind of continue to progress, how is it going to eventually conclude? Are there more, is it going to take a break and then come back again? Your feud with Damian Priest recently was one of my favorites in regards to a lot of different kind of elements, and there was a lot of effects with some fireballs and everything. You can speak to that feud or just in general. What excites you specifically about a feud week to week, so to speak? Is it just kind of how the build up? Because that's my favorite part about it as well.
It's kind of seeing where the end goal is and how we work backwards and how we have to deviate sometimes, because you can draw a straight line, which is obviously the worst thing to do in wrestling. Um, and it will never be a straight line. If we want to go this way, but in week one this happens and it made people react this way, then we have to like kind of adapt and take a turn this way to get back on track. Or maybe we all of a sudden realize, what, this was not the right way to go about things. We got to shift it. We got to do more this. And where we had verbiage A is not going to fly anymore because it doesn't make any sense because so and so has happened. um, you know, there's always a baseline with how we work, but you can at the same time never really be sure that that's what's going to go. So I think the best thing to go about it is just to kind of, like you said, the week to week you have something that you're working towards, but it will never be a straight line. And that can be good, that can be bad, because sometimes you are excited to get to conclusion A, but we're not going to do conclusion A anymore. So that can sometimes, it can be frustrating. And then you have to figure out like, all right, we gotta tip the scale this way in order for us to make, a week 5 or 6 work. So it's a very fine lined process. It's difficult, but I think all good storytelling is, and layers are usually not appreciated the moment they happen, but often when people look back, people kind of get this like romanticized feeling as to gazing back on what made them feel something, and then they'll realize like, oh, this happened because of this, and now I understand so and so. So I think, like I said, it's never a one size fits all,
No.
and a lot of times certain things won't make sense until like the second part of the story happens. So now the first part of the story makes a lot more sense, a lot more digestible. But that is what makes good storytelling, that it makes you feel something when it happens,
Yep.
but sometimes the actual conclusion doesn't come far later as to making you understand why that specific thing happened the way it did.
I kind of wanted to know where it was going with you and Damien, and it was really exciting. And I was invested in that feud. It was great.
Thank
Um, and I kind of wanted to ask you because Your start with the with WWE was of course in NXT, and that debut was the talk of the town and everything. We talked at the beginning of the interview about your entrance and everything. I sometimes forget, actually not sometimes, most of the time, I love NXT. I forget about the development component of it, right? Like I just feel like it's an amazing week to week wrestling show.
Mm.
Was that your feelings when you originally signed with NXT and you saw kind of that kind of development of the black and gold and everything? Like, did you sometimes forget it was like the development and the new stars? Like, it's crazy to think about.
No, no,
Okay.
because I think I would have a revelation each and every day coming into Performance Center and talking to like Shawn Michaels or Coach Bloom or Terry Taylor or, someone who was my original trainer like Robbie Brookside or like Norman Smiley. Like, we'd have a conversation and they would, shine a light on what they think. And then immediately your perspective would be like, man, like at the time I was wrestling for 13, 14 years when I entered.
Yep.
And, you think you know things, but then you talk to people that have been in the industry at that time for like 20, 30 years. And you're like, man, I know nothing. And then you really realize how deep the trenches are in regards to knowledge and how wrestling is understood. And no, it was never lost on me that we were absolutely a developmental thing. But I think that the good thing about black and gold, that era, and people can debate me on this all they want. I think at the time, I want to say that 2016 to 2020 era of professional wrestling, maybe even 2015 to 2020, because I want to be fair to all the people that made it that way. And it was certainly not me. Um, I think we were the best wrestling in the world. I think we
Yep.
had a perfect blend of the old school implementing into the new school. We had the guys like Terry Taylor that were in the old school teaching us, with guys like Shawn Michaels and Scotty Tahati that were teaching us their more modern way of wrestling. And then we had guys like Norman Smiley and Robbie Brookside who were much more implemented in that European style that I was originally trained in, and putting that in. And then you had someone as Coach Bloom who kind of overcapsulated everything, who was a big star in Japan and Mexico in the more modern day setting, but he was also a big deal within the WWE. So it was just a perfect storm of a lot of perfect things. And you had a group of guys like myself, and Adam Cole and Tommaso Ciampa, Ricochet, um, Viking Warriors, and the list goes on and on. And we all knew each other from the independents, and we all had worked each other so many times, whether that was in Europe or Japan or the United States itself. And it was just a perfect storm. And I think it's hard to replicate what that was. And I think that now, looking at NXT, there's incredible talent, but I think that NXT itself deliberately scaled themselves back down to be more of the presentable development. I think they've pushed that button harder, which is a great thing
Yeah.
because the talent is still that good.
Yeah.
I just think that the presentation, or at least the conversation behind the presentation, has been, we're the third brand, but we are a representative of that development. Whereas I felt with us, we became a standout entity on its own, where I think
Yes.
people a lot of times forgot that it was developmental.
Absolutely. I think it's more from the fan perspective, like people that are really like this, like it's kind of even like horror movie fans, right? We're so dialed into everything, right? And our eyes and ears are always open in regards to like the next big thing. Like I remember, like speaking for me, like when you showed up on NXT, I'm like, this is the guy. When Oba Femi showed up at NXT, I was like, this is the guy. Like we know, you know what I mean? If that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And Oba is a fantastic talent. At Cena's last performance, I was watching him and Cody Rhodes, and the guy just oozes special.
Yeah.
Not a lot of guys that really ooze special or that can capture the attention the way that he does. I'm a very big fan of him. Great guy outside of the ring too, and has all the skills to become one of the greats. Absolutely.
And then last question, super quick. We both love horror movies. Are we gonna see in 2026 and 2027, Aleister Black, in some horror movies? Like I want to see that happen. You know what I mean? Like CM Punk's
We,
in, Night Patrol. Like
I actually wrapped up a movie about a year and a half ago. I want to say, no, I'm lying. It was about a year ago, but unfortunately, due to the California fires,
Mm,
the release has been postponed. Um, you can find some of it on my social media in terms of like obviously me announcing that I was going to act in this movie.
yeah,
I think we're set to release this year. I had a ton of fun. Um, it is a very unique concept, and I can't say too much yet because
of
obviously
course.
like right now they're just kind of letting the wheels roll. Again, I hope to do a lot more
Yeah.
in the years because it's definitely made me kind of realize as to how much more I can and want to do. But yeah, like in funny, you bring up Night Patrol, and it was like such a cool thing because that concept of like vampire cops, for some reason, I've thought of that before, and then I see the movie going, and I'm like, man, that's such a cool concept, and I'm
Yeah.
very happy for Punk, who's obviously he's had his like roles here and there, and it's
Yeah.
just fun to see him consistently doing like these really cool projects. But in terms of myself, yes, I absolutely hope to do a lot more. I can't shine too much light on that because there's a few things kind of like rolling around.
Mhm.
Um, but the plan is absolutely to do not too much of it because wrestling will be my number one passion for as long as
Absolutely.
I would be on this planet. But if I have the opportunity more to come, then I will absolutely take that opportunity.
And
Yes.
specifically, horror movies are made by like people that just love horror movies. Like it's such a passionate, amazing kind
Yep.
of, craft, which is really, really exciting.
Yep.
But yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for everything you have done for professional wrestling. Thank you for everything you will continue to do for professional wrestling. Aleister Black, it was an honor and privilege to speak with you on Pop Tournament. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, this has been Pop Turnative, youtube.com/Pop Turn for previous episodes. Until next time, this was Aleister Black and PD Beats signing off.
Thank you for tuning in to Popternative. Make sure to check out our past episodes of Popternative on YouTube.
This has been an Autograph Communications production.